Picture a courtroom. The defendant has done something truly horrific. The facts aren't in dispute. But now the defense calls a neurologist to the stand. The expert points to a grainy scan of the defendant's brain and highlights a tiny, darkened smudge in the prefrontal cortex, a tumor, a lesion, a stroke. Suddenly, the vibe in the room shifts. We go from "he's a monster" to "he's got a broken machine." We move from moral condemnation to a sort of grim medical pity. We think, okay, maybe that guy didn't have a choice. Maybe his free will was hijacked by a bit of rogue tissue. Now, take a different person. This person hasn't had a stroke. They don't have a tumor. They've had a decent education. They aren't starving. And they commit the same crime. Okay, in this case, we say, aha, no smudge on the brain. This one was a choice. This one was free will. We love this distinction. We cling to it like a life raft in a stormy sea of biological determinism. We concede that biology can sometimes break the machine, but as long as the machine looks intact, we assume there's a little homunculus sitting in the driver's seat, making autonomous, uncaused decisions. This is what we call the last refuge of free will, the idea that while biology might influence the margins, the core of who we are is somehow independent of the clockwork of neurons and hormones. It's a beautiful, comforting, and utterly human idea. It's also completely wrong. To understand why, we have to stop looking for the smudge and start looking at how the machine works when it's supposedly normal. We have to look at the seconds, minutes, hours, and centuries that lead up to any single human action. If you want to understand why a person pulled a trigger or why they reached out to help an elderly person cross the street, you can't start at the moment the muscle contracted. You have to go back. Let's start 1 second before the behavior. We're in the brain. If the behavior was an act of aggression, chances are the amygdala was screaming. The amygdala is our ancient, weathered alarm system, specialized in fear, anxiety, and hey, that guy looks different from us. But the amygdala doesn't act in a vacuum. It's in a constant, high-stakes wrestling match with the frontal cortex, the part of the brain that's supposed to be the adult in the room. The frontal cortex is the bit that tells you, I know you want to punch him, but you're at a PTA meeting, so maybe just roll your eyes instead. Most people think free will lives in that frontal cortex. They think the frontal cortex is the you that decides to override the animal impulses of the amygdala. But here's the kicker. The frontal cortex is made of the same stuff as the amygdala. It's made of neurons, neurotransmitters, and receptors. It obeys the same laws of physics and chemistry. The strength of your frontal cortex, how well it can hold back the amygdala, isn't a result of willpower in some mystical sense. It's a result of how many serotonin receptors you have, the thickness of your axonal connections, and the metabolic state of your brain at that exact moment. If you're tired, if you're hungry, if your blood glucose is low, your frontal cortex is less effective. You didn't choose to have low blood sugar, just haven't eaten since 7 a.m. But we're just getting started. Let's go back minutes, 2 hours before the behavior. Now we're talking about hormones. Take testosterone, the favorite whipping boy of people trying to explain aggression. People think testosterone causes aggression. It doesn't. Testosterone doesn't invent aggression. It turns up the volume on signals that are already there. It makes the amygdala more sensitive to perceived threats. It makes a neutral face look slightly more menacing. Or look at oxytocin, the cuddle hormone. We love oxytocin. It makes us warm and fuzzy and prosocial, but only toward people we perceive as us. If you're a NIM, oxytocin actually makes people more xenophobic and aggressive towards you. Did you choose your hormone levels this morning? Do you choose how sensitive your receptors are to those hormones? No, but those levels are dictating how your brain processes the world in the seconds leading up to your free choice. Now, let's go back days and months. We're into the realm of neuroplasticity. The brain is not a static block of clay. It's constantly rewiring itself based on experience. If you've been living in a high-stress environment for the last 6 months, your amygdala has physically grown larger. It has sprouted new connections. It's more twitchy. Meanwhile, Your frontal cortex may have actually atrophied under the constant soak of glucocorticoid stress hormones. You were literally walking around with a different brain than you had a year ago, shaped by factors you didn't control: the economy, your boss, the noise levels in your neighborhood. We have to go back further. Let's look at your adolescence. This is a bizarre time for the human species. It's when the brain is almost fully cooked, except for one crucial part, the frontal cortex. It's the last part of the brain to get fully wired up, not finishing the job until your mid-20s. This explains why teenagers do things that make you wonder if they've lost their minds. They have the engine of a Ferrari, the amygdala, and the dopamine-driven reward system, and the brakes of a tricycle, the immature frontal cortex. The environment you experienced during this period, the peers you hung out with, the traumas you endured, the successes you had laid down the permanent tracks for how your adult frontal cortex functions. Go back further still, to the womb. This is where people get really uncomfortable. It turns out that high levels of stress hormones in a pregnant mother can cross the placenta and essentially program the developing fetus's brain to be more reactive to stress later in life. We're talking about permanent changes to gene expression epigenetics. You were being biased toward certain behaviors before you even took your first breath. Epigenetic mechanisms showing DNA methylation and histone modification. AI-generated Shutterstock Explorer. And why was your mother stressed? Maybe it's because she lived in a society with massive wealth inequality, or a culture that's been at war for generations. Now we're into the realm of culture and evolution. If your ancestors were nomadic pastoralists living in a desert, they likely developed a culture of honor, a social system where you have to be ready to use violence to protect your herds because the government isn't going to do it for you. Hundreds of years later, people from those cultures still show higher physiological stress responses to insults than people from culture of dignity backgrounds. You are carrying the echoes of your ancestors' survival strategies in your blood pressure and your amygdala. When you look at this entire arc from the millisecond of a neuron firing back through the hormones of the morning, the childhood development, the fetal environment, all the way to the evolutionary pressures of 10,000 years ago, where is the gap? Where is the little bit of space where free will can sneak in? We like to think there's a me that stands apart from the biology. We say, sure, I have these impulses, but I choose which ones to act on. But the choice to resist an impulse is itself a biological process. The ability to exert self-control is a function of the prefrontal cortex, which was shaped by your genes, your mother's stress levels, your childhood nutrition, and the amount of sleep you got last night. You can't will yourself to have more willpower any more than you can will yourself to be 6 inches taller. It's all biology, all the way down. This is the part where people start to feel a sense of existential dread. If there's no free will, does that mean nothing matters? Does it mean we should just open all the prison doors and let chaos reign? Not at all. We don't let people with broken brakes drive cars, and we don't let people with dangerous biological predispositions roam free if they're going to hurt others. But we stop saying they deserve to be punished in some cosmic, moral sense. We move from a model of retribution to a model of quarantine and repair. Think about epilepsy. A few hundred years ago, if you had a seizure, people thought you were possessed by a demon, thought you were choosing to consort with the devil. They would burn you at the stake. Today, we know it's just a rogue electrical storm in the brain. We don't hate the person having the seizure. We give them medicine. We've successfully demoralized epilepsy. We've accepted that it's biology, not a failure of soul. The challenge, the massive, uncomfortable, society-altering challenge is to realize that the same logic applies to everything. It's not just the broken brains with tumors and seizures, but the normal brains that are just a little bit more aggressive, or a little less empathetic, or a little more prone to addiction. We live in a world where we reward people for things they didn't earn and punish people for things they didn't choose. If we're born with a high-functioning frontal cortex, a stable home, and a genetic predisposition for high dopamine receptor density, You'll likely be praised for your discipline and hard work, but you didn't choose your genes or your zip code. You're just a lucky recipient of a well-calibrated machine. Does this mean we're just puppets? Just biological machines acting out a script written by the universe? In a sense, yes. But that doesn't mean the experience of being human isn't real. It doesn't mean that love and pain and wonder aren't significant. It just means they have a source. The last refuge of free will is the idea that we are the captains of our souls. It's a powerful myth. It helps us get out of bed in the morning. But the more we learn about the brain, the smaller the refuge becomes. Eventually, there'll be nowhere left for the homunculus to hide. And when that happens, we might finally have to face the most radical idea of all, that understanding the biological roots of our behavior isn't a loss of humanity. It's the beginning of a much deeper, much more compassionate understanding of what it actually means to be a human being. We are complicated. We are messy. We are the product of everything that came before us. We aren't free in the way we want to be, but we are connected to the entire history of life on this planet in a way that is far more profound than any myth of autonomous choice could ever be. And maybe, just maybe, once we accept that we are machines, we can finally get around to learning how to fix the ones that are broken and being a little kinder to the ones that are just trying to get through the day. At the end of it all, you're left with a choice, a choice in the biological sense. You can cling to the idea that you are the uncaused cause of your own actions. Or you can look into the vast, intricate machinery of your own existence and realize that you are part of something much bigger. It's scary, sure. But there's also a strange kind of freedom in realizing you were never really in control in the first place. It takes the pressure off. You aren't a god. Here, just a very sophisticated primate trying to make sense of a very complicated world. And honestly, given the biology we were handed, it's a miracle we're doing as well as we are.